While Ukraine's offensive into Kursk Oblast is slowing down, there are increasing signs and rumors about a second offensive by the Ukrainians that might start soon. We'll talk about this and about all the developments along the front line, international aid, politics, etc. in this situation report about the war in Ukraine. Ukraine struck the Crimean Peninsula on the night of the 15th to the 16th of August. It struck with aerial drones, with naval drones, and according to the Russians, with 12 ATACMS missiles. The Russians are saying the ATACMS were aimed at the Crimean bridge and were all shot down. Just debris from it hit the bridge but didn't do any structural damage. This would be the first time that ATACMS are being used against the Crimean bridge, that any Western long-range or medium-range missiles and cruise missiles are used against the Crimean bridge. So I'm somewhat still doubtful that this is the truth, but so far we only have the Russian claim. In Irkutsk, a Russian Tupolev 22 M3 bomber crashed. This is confirmed by the Russians by now. They say through a technical difficulty, and while the Russians use one of the bombers they used to strike Ukraine, Ukraine itself is also losing a MiG-29 fighter, but according to claims it was lost on the ground, so no crew was lost. This should be the second loss within just 1 week though. As I said in a previous video, the Ukrainians were mourning a MiG-29 pilot in a combat mission, which is likely means that his MiG-29 was shot down, even though he might have been in another plane like an L-39. But at least there's a high likelihood that Ukraine lost 2 MiG-29 in this week. They also got struck, a Patriot missile system also got struck. We see it firing here, and then the cluster munition from the attackers deploy. The damage is not fully visible, but it was close enough that at least damage is more or less assured. Let's switch to the Kursk Oblast. Here we have Petrenko's map, which shows that there are some developments in this and this direction, but overall the speed is slowing down. We have still Riba showing all the axes of Ukrainian attacks, and the Ukrainians are still piercing through the front line. But when it comes to actual new control over some areas, it's getting slower and slower. The Ukrainians are consolidating their gains right now and get the resupply going. If we look here on the map, it makes perfect sense. They only have one big road crossing in, through which all the Ukrainian forces inside of Russia have to be resupplied. 3 hot meals a day, ammunition galore, medical equipment, additional shells, even down to theoretically toilet paper. Everything has to be brought there. Thus, it's quite a challenge, and Ukraine will have to solve that before they have a serious chance of pushing forward. Still, though, we have a geolocation here from the east. There, the Ukrainians are in the town of Spalnoe. This is directly southeast of Borki. Here we have now Ukrainian presence in here. Likely it's now in Ukrainian hands, but at this point, this is one of only two advances that are more or less confirmed. We have at the same time Romanov confirming, I should probably put it here, Romanov confirming that they are advancing along the river here, the same in the direction of Komarova. Here the Russians reporting Ukrainian advances, where the Ukrainians have now closed the land route into the western, into the area south of the same river. This is important because the Ukrainians struck, as you can see here, they struck the bridge, a bridge over the same river in yesterday, and we see here those initially they struck it with HIMARS, but obviously the result wasn't satisfying enough, so they used a JDAM or a hammer that we can see here. The bridge was hit by a bomb and then collapsed afterwards, like I expected in yesterday's video, that it was likely through the Air Force, not through additional strikes with HIMARS. This led the Russians to already react. We now have satellite pictures that a pontoon bridge has been laid over the Same River. This allows the Russians to still supply their forces. There's reports that the second bridge in Svanoe has been attacked. I've read a claim that it's already destroyed. I have not seen any proof of this, so from my understanding, that bridge might still be standing. And we have a third bridge here at Karis. And now, as we can see, a pontoon bridge, which should be somewhere here in this region, so the Russians can for now still supply them. Right now, there are rumors in the Russian Telegram that the Russian armed forces have ordered a general withdrawal from that area. So basically, all those units would now move north and evacuate the area to prevent a pocket from closing. As of now, this is more or less only rumors. We'll have to see over the next few days if the Russians actually withdraw from the area here. So far, I do not see this as confirmed. Let's switch to the northern front, and here we have a report from the town of Kolotilovka. Here, I think it was the Wall Street Journal. Yeah, the Washington Post talked to soldiers that were in place, and they claimed they'd advanced for about 6 miles, so 10 kilometers, into Russia in the town of Kolotilova. What they are saying, though, is that the opposition was very strong. They took serious casualties and were stuck inside of Russia for several days before they could be evacuated from there. Whether that actually means that the Ukrainians advanced 10 kilometers in is far from certain, and I'm not accusing the soldier for a lie. It's simply he even admits himself he didn't know the area, and under fire I'm pretty sure distances appear longer. So this just shows us that the Ukrainians managed to get in. They occupied Russian trenches and then withdrew later. Another sign of the advances into Russia that are happening not just here at Sucha, but in other areas as well, where the Ukrainians don't just use sabotage groups, but mechanized forces to cross into Russia. On the eastern front, on the northern front here directly, this area, no fresh reports about changes. So from what I've seen, everything is unchanged. So we go directly to the eastern front. Here at the town of Makivka, I have a fresh geolocation that the Russians are now in the northern part. Not a big change, but now they are at this point here, so maybe this is now Russian. They haven't crossed the Sherebets directly in this area yet from what I've seen, but they have reached it a couple of days ago, no, actually 2 or 3 weeks ago, so not a massive change in the area here, but still a recorded Russian advance. South of the Seversky Donetsk, I do not have any change in the area of Seversk, not even in the area of Chasiv Yar. The first change I have is here at Ozaryanivka. Here the Russians managed to get to this side, as a video shows where they get dropped from a drone that was geolocated here. So they have crossed the canal at this point here, but we don't have any further proof of further advances. It just shows that they are attacking there as well and managed a small advance. Further south, the Russians continue their attempts to encircle the Ukrainian troops between New York and Toretsk. We have a geolocation here which shows that they have advanced out of Salisne towards New York and are actually closing in on it. On the map, it should be more or less here, if I see correctly. We can quickly check. It's, let's say directly northwest of that pond. Yeah, so roughly here at this point. The Russians have advanced more or less until this point. This means that the area in between is getting smaller and smaller, but the Russians are still claiming that the Ukrainians control the area south of it. I cannot confirm it in detail, but from what I've seen, here we see 2 kilometers only left. We had Ukrainian troops until roughly a week ago in this area, more or less, which would obviously be self-explanatory that it's an ideal pocket. But from all the reports I've seen, even though I'm still missing visual evidence, from the reports I've seen, the Ukrainians have moved in this direction and are withdrawing. So even if they manage to cross New York, the Ukrainians are only left in this area and will probably withdraw in time. But with this, they obviously managed to achieve a turning maneuver, forcing the Ukrainians to withdraw in this area. The successes the Russian successes in the area of Pokrovsk are continuing, and they are continuing fairly significantly. We start off with Russian successes in Rodivka. Here we have, that was this. Here we have them deeper into the town. Now they are a little bit further north, not significantly in this time, but the Russians have now also entered Shuravka, and they have taken Orlivka. So just a couple of days ago, they were still 2 or 3 kilometers further east. They have also already entered Mykolaiv, which is here in this point. We see them even in the western part already, so the whole town might already be taken at this point. Another urban obstacle taken already on their way to Pokrovsk. Shelane has also been taken. I have a geolocation here of the Russians already in the southeast of it. The complete town of Shelane has now fallen to the Russians as well. Further south, we have Russians in Georgivka. Also, fresh geolocation. Yep, this is it here. We've seen them operate there for a while, and they've actually already been visually proven in Maximilianivka, but apparently without being able to take a foothold. So I don't see that anything has seriously changed, even though we have fresh geolocations, but they are still within Georgivka, where the Ukrainians should not have a serious presence anymore. So I don't see much of a change in this direction. This was all that I have in territorial changes along the rest of the front line. Nothing has changed since Wednesday from what I've seen. So let's go to the overall situation. The Ukrainians, when we talk about Kursk, are clearly consolidating their wins now. We still have attacks. We still have penetrations into the Russian lines, but it appears that the pressure is weakening. The Ukrainians are slowing down with their advances. The Russians by now have sent several thousand men from Ukraine into Kursk Oblast, but so far everything I see, it was only from the rear areas, so the effect on the front line is not visible yet and cannot be expected immediately, as the Russians, as said, have not taken out frontline units to counter the Ukrainian attack into Kursk Oblast. But we already do have effects, and one of them is mentioned here, where the Ukrainians are saying that by now in Kharkiv they are facing 2 to 4 glide bombs per day, whereas in the past it has been 30 to 50. So we see the Russians have redeployed their air force. A lot of it is going towards the Kursk offensive. In the last situational picture about Kursk, I said that now the Ukrainians are reporting 30 to 50 glide bombs on Sumy per day, which before has not been that degree. So they are striking now at this position, obviously helping the other parts of the front line as of now. Still, though, the situation is dire, especially in the east. We have a Ukrainian mill blogger here saying that the strength in relative terms is 10 to 1 in the Pokrovsk area. So the Russians are 10 times as strong as they are, and the superiority is quite massive. At the same time, we have CNN reporting that the Ukrainians still are not allowed to use the longer range cruise missiles and ballistic missiles, ATACMS, and the US even blocked the usage of Scalp and of Storm Shadow into Russia. And according to CNN, the US remains reluctant to allow Ukraine to use long-range US-provided weapons into Kursk, multiple officials say, and this is the important part, not because of the risk of escalation, but because the US has only a limited supply of the long-range missiles known as ATACMS to provide to Ukraine, and thinks they would be better used to continue targeting Russian-occupied Crimea, officials say. So the officials that aren't named have the audacity to basically say, we know better than you, Ukraine, what to attack, so we don't even give you a choice. We ban you from using them. I'll leave it up to you, and I'll leave it up to you in the comment section what you think about this US policy and if CNN is right at this point. But we need to come to a point where we ask ourselves, is a new offensive coming? An additional offensive by the Ukrainians. We have further reports. Here, for instance, again, I think it was again Wall Street Journal here, that Wall Street Journal, If we are supposed to have 5 or 6 people, this is about Pokrovsk now, so Eastern Front. If we are supposed to have 5 or 6 people in a position, we'll have 2 or 3, said the 45-year-old army major who has been stationed in the Chasiv Yar area for the past 2 months. He said they were so short-handed that cooks, mechanics, and other rear personnel were being deployed to the trenches. It's a matter of time before the enemy finds a weak spot. So the Ukrainians are incredibly stretched thin, as we can see in the Pokrovsk area as well. They are sending troops to the front line that are not really qualified to do that, which means less efficient, which means higher losses. This is serious shortage in personnel. They are also reporting a 10-to-1 ratio in artillery fire that is possible by both. So the Ukrainians starve their eastern front out of artillery ammunition despite the resupply having restarted and the situation no longer being as dire as around the new year. At the same time, the new mobilization law came into effect on the 18th of May this year, so 3 months ago. We have seen, or I guess you will have seen as well, there were tons of videos, unpleasant videos to be perfectly honest, of men being dragged into buses, showing that they do it. They call up people, and those who refuse they drag off the street, which obviously means on one that is being forced into a van there will be tens, there will be hundreds that have voluntarily appeared after being called up. So the Ukrainians should under normal circumstances have a high 5 to maybe low 6-digit number of new soldiers. They shortened the basic training to just 6 weeks. The rest of the training was supposed to be in brigades, so a serious amount of those should already be able to at least be deployed in some way. But where are they? Ukraine has, according to most estimates, still under 10,000 soldiers in Kursk. There are some numbers that come closer to 10, but I have not seen a serious analyst saying that they have significantly over 10. So we have 10,000 in Kursk. They are rotating, obviously. There will be reserves. So let's be generous and say 20 to 30,000 additional men are supporting the Kursk offensive behind it. But we do not see significant resupply in men and material to the east. We don't see any, or we barely any see fresh recruited personnel in Kursk. All the reports I'm reading are of combat veterans, of units, of soldiers that have been withdrawn mostly from the east, but from other areas as well. I have yet to see an article that says Igor called up 2 months ago is now in Sucha or something like this. So it seems to be that we are only facing veteran units there. Where are the fresh recruits? And at this point, the question is being pushed upon us what Ukraine's plan is here. Now, Kursk itself, we can argue what the strategic objective here is and if it even has a strategic value. It clearly will have a value because by now the Ukrainians are so solidified in Kursk that even if they decide to withdraw within a week, the Russians will have no choice but to reinforce their whole international border here to prevent something from this happening again, the embarrassment that the Ukrainians can just march in and take some territory. So this will fix more Russian soldiers, but at the same time, obviously, the question will have to be asked, is that all? Is that all we can expect? And is this the goal? So what if this is just the first offensive? Now, this isn't just my idea. We have Sasha Kotz, Russian mill blogger and military correspondent, I think, for a Russian television channel, and he says we know that they almost deployed all their elite infantry in the Kursk direction, but we have the feeling we haven't seen everything yet there. Mostly light armored vehicles, armored fighting vehicles, and Soviet tanks. We have yet to see the Leopards, and we yet have to see the Abrams that are still in Ukraine's inventory. He believes that they might do something else, either go for Enerhodar, that would be the nuclear power plant, or they could even strike south towards the Crimean Peninsula by using the distraction from the Russian side with their Kursk offensive. He's not the only one. Igor Girkin, who is currently in prison because he was one of the most accurate military analysts on the Russian side. Now, he's a convicted war criminal. He is a ultra-nationalist, but he was not just well connected and well versed in military matters, he didn't hold back in criticism. And that led finally, I think, to a 6-year sentence just a year ago to him. And in a letter that is being published on this channel, I think by his wife, he said, regarding the situation at the front, I am closely monitoring it. I consider the Ukrainians' attack in the Kursk region to be a distraction. We should expect a second, the main one, in which they will mainly use their remaining reserves and aviation F-16, most likely in the Crimean direction. And if you are not here for the first time, roughly a week ago, maybe 10 days ago, I mentioned Riba, one of the ultra-nationalist Russian mill bloggers, which map I use. And here you can always see that they even say these regions are an integral part of Russia. This is how solidly they are on the Russian side. They also mentioned that they think there will be a second offensive. We have no idea where, but let's look at what we do know. If we take both Sasha Kotz and Igor Girkin, that Crimea could be the target. Now we see shaping operations on the Crimean Peninsula for probably a year. The Black Sea Fleet has been pushed away. Theoretically, this would even allow for an amphibious operation. I don't think it's realistic. It should be far too risky. Maybe they would manage to land, but the Russian Air Force should still be able to destroy the resupply ships. So I don't think an amphibious operation in itself is too likely. But the Air Force could, the Navy could obviously still help with serious fighting in the northern Crimean Peninsula if they were still close, either with cruise missiles or even with their guns, guns on the ships itself and with their air defense as well. Then there were reports that I mentioned here on the channel that the Russians were saying 4 of their airfields are no longer being used because of the massive attacks by the Ukrainians. So even the Air Force on the Crimean Peninsula is under pressure, and again we are reporting attacks on the Russian air defense, on the Russian radar system, on the Russian infrastructure to defend against cruise missiles, drones, and planes. So by now we have the air defense being weakened, we have the Navy being pushed away, and the Air Force also getting pushed away. Ukraine is clearly focusing on the Crimean Peninsula. Maybe it's because the US insist on this. Maybe it's for other reasons. Maybe the Ukrainians think this is the best way to strike the Russian rear, as they are not allowed to use the ATACMS on airfields here, and the southern area still has to be supported. So there still have to be supply depots here. There still have to be air defense stations, systems. There still have to be headquarters. All of this is accessible here. It's still away from the front line, like doctrine and like necessity would require. But in this case, they are allowed to strike it, whereas a headquarters or an airfield in Stary Oskol cannot be struck because of the US regulations. So this might already be the explanation why they keep striking Crimea. This is not a guarantee that a strike will aim at Crimea, but it doesn't exclude it. It would definitely help any advance towards the Crimean Peninsula, any attempt to advance against the Crimean Peninsula when we've seen the past attacks on it, as it would give the Ukrainians more way to maneuver and more freedom in the air as well. And as I said already, there was even another attack on the Crimean Bridge that the Russians are reporting. Now, the Crimean Bridge has lost a lot of its strategic value with the opening of the land route. But if there's a strike towards the south and the land route gets endangered, the Russians, as far as I know, are building a railroad here on the south. But as far as I know, it's not ready yet. So we have the Russian supply lines just 40 kilometers from the front line here in the south, where if they get endangered, the Russians have no choice to use the Crimean Bridge again. We also heard in the past that the Ukrainians even struck the ferries over the Crimean Peninsula, over the Straits of Kerch. Why would they strike the ferries if the Crimean Bridge has no longer that value? Why would they strike the continuous striking the landing boats? All of those claims, we can find other reasons for it as well, but it must be clear that it would help with a potential invasion towards the south. Now, those are the arguments where it might help. The problems remain, though. The fortifications in the south aren't suddenly gone. They might have even improved. I haven't heard any serious reports that the Russians were working and reinforcing their fortifications here. While it's possible, at least this I cannot confirm, but the minefields are still there, and Ukraine failed to penetrate them in any seriousness 1 year ago. The only thing they managed was to pierce through the first serious line of defense in a width of 3 to 5 kilometers at most, and there the depth was a kilometer and a half. So they never really managed to penetrate through the Surovikin line, and still those lines are still there. And this doesn't mean that the Ukrainian side can't have innovation to go through it in the future, but this would be a bet and simply take hope as guidance. So while it's possible that the Ukrainian strike in the south, while it would make the most strategic sense, I'm still highly doubtful that this would be successful. A second strike might be anywhere else. It might be into Bryansk, for all we know. It might come here in the north, trying to capture a bigger area in the Kursk Oblast. We have no idea, but I'm not the only one thinking this can't be all. Now, giving up parts in the east is part of a military logic. If the Ukrainians are highly under pressure in the east, sending more troops there in reinforcing defeat doesn't make too much sense. The Ukrainians will not get in the near future artillery superiority. They will not have adequate means to stop the glide bombing completely. So they would just reinforce, send their new reserves to slow down defeat, but not to stop it in this place. They probably have no choice but to take the initiative at a completely different place. This doesn't mean that it is in the Crimean Peninsula. We don't see what is going on here, but from what we can see, I have high doubts that everything that what we see in Kursk is everything already. There must be more, there should be more. So if people like numbers, and there's a lot of ifs, and I need to say there's no guarantee. It doesn't mean that this is a done deal. We have historic precedent as well. In 22 and in 23, always two offensives. In 22, initially they started in Kherson and they declared they're going to liberate Kherson, to then suddenly do the Balaklia offensive. In 23, they counterattacked in Bakhmut here, and then to attack in the south. This doesn't mean they're going to do it the same way again, but it makes it at least highly possible, as this is normal. And we've seen in the past too that the Ukrainian side has been highly disciplined in their strategic reserves. We had it at the beginning of the war, for instance, when the situation along the front line was absolutely dire, and the Ukrainians still had several armored brigades in reserves, didn't commit them to slow down the Russians by all means. No, they had the patience, accepting territorial losses, accepting defeat, to have something in the backhand to strike back themselves, to take the initiative. And we've seen them having the strategic patience. We've seen them having the strategic discipline in the past, and this is just likely that it's going to continue here. So while people like numbers, and I have to say this is guesswork, this is putting dots together, but not a guarantee that this is going to happen. I'm reinforced by Russian analysts that have no interest making the Ukrainians stronger than they are. They have an interest to let them appear weaker out of propaganda terms, and still they believe a second Ukrainian offensive is going to come. As this is still not a guarantee, I would guess 60% maybe. I would say 60% likelihood that the Ukrainians will do a second offensive, or at least a serious second line axis of advance somewhere into Russia in the coming maybe 6 to 8 weeks. We'll have to see if this is true. I can't guarantee it. I'll just put the dots together, read between the lines and make my guess. But this is not a guarantee. And obviously it's not a guarantee that it's going to be successful. But Ukraine can't continue the war by simply feeding more bodies into the Eastern Front, where the Russians will probably still have more bodies for quite some time and more artillery shells as well. So they need to find another solution, and another offensive might be the way to it. Let's go to the rest of the situation report. In troop generation, we have some news that Russia will change the age to join it's like a volunteer operation to support the army, the DOSAAF, and the age will be reduced from 18 to 14 years. This organization does patriotic education and military training, so they aren't sending child soldiers into Ukraine, but they are basically educating children, and you could say indoctrinate children while giving them military training in advance. So they are basically ready to be used as soon as they turn 18 and thus volunteer to the armed forces, which would probably be the hope. At the same time, we have Strelkov. Not Strelkov, we have Slatkov saying here about the recruitment, about the military academies. It's a pity that now there is no competition for many military schools. There are far fewer applicants than in peacetime. What does it show to us? It shows that those who are of a upper middle class, who are not in financial need, those who are smarter, those who would become who would aim to become officers, those do where the parents would send them to a military school and who have the qualifications, the education from school, all the prerequisites to become a military cadet instead of just joining the ranks, they don't want to. They don't want to go into the meat grinder. We have that in the report from Moscow as well, that according to the reports, 90% of those who volunteer do it for financial gain or because they are in financial trouble. So this is not, the Russian recruitment is not a recruitment out of patriotism. Those who have a choice, who don't feel the financial need to supply their family, to pay off the house or to be able to buy a house for the family, those who don't need that, don't want to fight anymore. And we see that here, and it obviously will cause trouble in recruiting officers. Here it says that now they are selecting good enlisted personnel and are sending them to the officer schools to train them there. Then we have technical news. In Russia, there's currently the Army 2024 exhibition, and here they are presenting an electronic warfare system against helicopters against drone. Just 10 days after 2 helicopters were shot down by drones. This is clearly not a sign of innovation this fast. We've seen the first attempts to shoot down helicopters, to intercept helicopters with drones at least a year and a half ago, and this will probably have led to this development, but we see that the Russians claim that it's about to be ready. Also, reports is that they are now going to start supplying the T-90M with an active protection system. Here, innovation and modernization is going to happen as well. And we have reports in the political sphere. There we have an agreement that is being reported that the Ukrainians and the Russians were negotiating, I think in Qatar, to have an agreement, basically a partial ceasefire about the electricity infrastructure. According to reports, this has been derailed by Ukraine's invasion into Russia, at least as for now, but it proves us one thing: military pressure against Putin works. Putin has no reason to sign up to a partial ceasefire unless he has the necessity to achieve this. Whether it's smart for Ukraine to do that when they have already lost every conventional power plant, or almost every conventional power plant, is a different story, but that's for Ukraine to decide, not for me if this is a smart way. But it shows us that pressure on the Russians, military pressure works and leads to reactions from their side. Then we have reports that Biden is open to sending long-range cruise missiles. Those are the JASSM. We could basically say this is something like Storm Shadow, Scalp, Taurus. Supposedly somewhat more stealthy. Range should be like 360 kilometers, depending on which versions they give them. There are longer ranged ones too, but this is unlikely that they are going to get them, as the US will need them for China, for a potential conflict with China. And the other thing is the US have only built 2,000 of them for the US Air Force and have used some in training. So the likely volume that can be given to Ukraine is probably 100, maybe 200 at most. But it still would give the Ukrainians some more abilities to strike targets in Russia or in Russian-held territory, as we can probably expect. It's still not getting a permission, Ukraine to get a permission to strike into Russia itself. And then the German media is reporting that Germany does no longer want to fund military aid for Ukraine. Now, the current commitments are going to be fulfilled, but there will not be additional money, and this was causing an outcry. The reason for that is fairly simple. This, for instance, is a survey polls about an election that is happening in 15 days in the state of Saxony. And the current ruling parties are the Green Party, the SPD, and the FDP. With the current setting, the FDP will miss the 5% threshold by a wide margin, whereas the SPD and the Green Party are both in danger of falling under it. So it might be that none of the parties that are ruling on the national level might even enter the local parliament, the state parliament. This is obviously a disaster for them, and so we need to put it in a political context. Probably once the elections in the states are over, there will be more money, but we'll have to see about this. Especially the FDP, whose the finance minister is from that party, is under pressure because they finance the ideas of the other two parties, which are far more left wing, and their basic voters are usually the ones who want fiscal responsibility, who want less government intervention. So this is a contradiction, and right now they are in serious danger of not making the 5% threshold on the national level as well. So we need to see this in an election campaign context, and it's basically somewhat comparable to what happened last year in the US, even though I'm not sure this is going to find a conclusion after half a year there in this context. But still, politics plays a role in international aid, and this is obviously some reason why Putin is still believing he can win the war in the long run because of things like this. But we'll have to see. That was it from me for today with this situation report. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment. What do you think? Do you think Ukraine will start a second offensive somewhere? Do you think they're going to just open up a second axis of advance? Or do you think that was all that Ukraine was capable of, and taking Kursk was worth losing more in the east? Leave your comment in the comment section, and if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everyone already supporting this channel, but that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.